The morning Adrian Voss signed a marriage contract, he was not thinking about love. He was thinking about survival. Somewhere in this city, a woman had been hunted since she was 9 years old, and her own father had been the one pulling the strings. Adrian had built an empire on fear. He had broken men twice his size without blinking, but nothing in his 20 years inside the criminal world had prepared him for the truth buried inside Victor Hale's mansion. Before we go further, if you are watching this right now, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. And trust me, you do not want to miss what comes next. The courthouse on West Meridian Street smelled like old paper and broken promises. Adrian Voss stood near the entrance with his hands loose at his sides, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than most people earned in 3 months. And he looked at the double doors across the lobby the way a man looks at something he has already decided to walk through regardless of what waits on the other side. His jaw was tight, his breathing was controlled. Around him, 2 of his men, Decker and a younger enforcer named Rilo, stood at a careful distance, close enough to move if something went wrong, far enough to pretend this was a normal morning. It was not a normal morning. Rilo leaned slightly toward Decker and said nothing. Decker stared straight ahead. Adrian checked his watch. 11:47. The ceremony was scheduled for noon. Victor Hale had specified the time, the location, the number of witnesses permitted, and even the order in which documents would be signed. The old man liked control the way other men liked oxygen. He breathed it. He hoarded it. He arranged entire human lives around it, including his daughters. Adrian had met Victor Hale twice before today. Once at a private club on the north side of the city, where Victor had laid out the terms of the arrangement over single malt whiskey and a view of Lake Carver 40 stories below. The second time at Victor's corporate headquarters, where lawyers had reduced a human being to a line item in a contract. Elena Hale, age 28, sole heir, unmarried, residing at the Hale estate in Westbrook, medical history attached under separate cover. Adrian had not asked to see the medical history. He had read it anyway. He had read everything. That was how he had survived long enough to be standing in this courthouse at all. The double doors opened at 11:52, and a woman walked through them alone. She was not what he expected. He was not sure what he had expected. Something fragile, maybe. Something that matched the careful language in the contract documents, the words like limited social exposure and ongoing recovery that lawyers used when they did not want to say a person had been damaged and kept away from the world. He had expected someone who walked like she apologized for existing. Elena Hale did not walk like that. She walked like a person who had decided, somewhere between the car and the entrance, that she was going to get through this without falling apart, and that decision was visible in every step, controlled, deliberate, slightly too careful to be natural. She wore a dark dress, long sleeves, her dark hair pulled back. The scars on the left side of her face and neck were not hidden. She had not attempted to hide them. That was the first thing Adrian noticed, and it was not what he had anticipated. She stopped when she saw him. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Around them, the lobby continued. A clerk crossed the floor carrying folders. An elderly man sat on a bench studying a form. Somewhere a phone rang twice and stopped. The world kept moving with complete indifference to the 2 people standing in the center of it. "You're Adrian Voss," she said. "I am. I've read about you. Most of it is probably accurate." She studied him with eyes that were very dark and very direct. "My father said you were going to protect me." Adrian said nothing. "He also said you were dangerous." "He's right about that part." Something moved behind her eyes. Not fear exactly, more like recognition, the expression of someone who has learned to categorize threats quickly and has just filed this one under a category that already existed. She looked toward the clerk's desk. "Then let's get this over with." They signed the documents in a small room off the main corridor. A judge presided. 2 witnesses, one from each side, stood against the wall without making eye contact with each other. The ceremony took 11 minutes. There were no rings. Victor Hale had sent his personal attorney in his place, a trim man named Portis who smelled faintly of cologne and said nothing that was not legally required. Elena signed her name with a steady hand. Adrian signed after her. When it was done, Portis shook Adrian's hand once, nodded to Elena without quite looking at her face, and left. Elena watched him go. "He's been my father's lawyer for 15 years, she said quietly. "He's never once looked me in the eye." Adrian said, "That tells you something." "It tells me a lot of things." They walked out of the courthouse side by side. The afternoon light was sharp and cold. Adrian's convoy was waiting. 2 black SUVs, engines running, Decker already moving to open the rear door of the first vehicle. The street was not busy, a mid-block stretch of city road with parallel parking on both sides and a coffee place with its lights on across the way. Normal, routine, the kind of street that felt safe because nothing had happened on it yet. Adrian was 3 steps from the vehicle when the first shot hit the windshield of the lead SUV. The sound was not dramatic. Glass breaking, then a sharp crack from somewhere across the street, and then everything compressed into a single second of pure animal reaction. Adrian grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her down and back simultaneously, his body already moving behind the SUV's engine block before his mind had fully processed what was happening. Decker was shouting. Rilo was drawing his weapon. The second SUV's doors were opening, more of his men spilling out onto the asphalt, and the street that had been quiet half a second ago was suddenly full of motion and noise, and the particular kind of violent urgency that Adrian Voss had spent 20 years learning to survive. Elena did not freeze. That was the second thing he noticed about her. She went down when he pulled her down. She pressed herself flat behind the vehicle, and she did not scream. She looked at him with those direct dark eyes and said, "How many?" "Don't know yet." "Are they here for you or me?" It was not a hysterical question. It was a tactical question, delivered in a voice that shook only slightly, from a woman who had just been shot at outside her own wedding courthouse and was already trying to calculate the geometry of the situation. Adrian looked at her for 1 full second, really looked at her, and felt something shift in his assessment. "Stay behind the engine block," he said. "Don't move unless I say move." "I know how engine blocks work?" "Then you're already ahead of most people I've dealt with." The exchange of fire lasted approximately 90 seconds. Adrian's team was experienced and they had the numbers. The attackers, whoever they were, had anticipated a smaller protection detail. By the time the street went quiet, one of Adrian's men had a graze wound on his shoulder, and the attackers had withdrawn, leaving behind a single vehicle, a dark sedan, stolen plates, and 3 shell casings on the sidewalk. No bodies. Professionals, then. Or at least professional enough to extract their own casualties. Adrian walked the scene for 4 minutes before getting into the vehicle. He looked at the angle of the shots, the distance, the entry points. He looked at the sedan. He crouched beside one of the casings without touching it and studied it. Elena had gotten into the vehicle when instructed. When he climbed in after her, she was sitting upright, her hands flat on her thighs, her breathing measured. A small cut on her left forearm, where she had caught the edge of the door frame. She had not mentioned it. "You're bleeding," he said. "I know." "You should have said something." "You were busy." He looked at her. She looked back. The car was moving now, Decker navigating them out of the area through a route that bypassed the incoming police response. "The attack," she said. "Was that because of you? Because of what you are?" "Possibly," Adrian said. "But I've had enemies for 15 years, and none of them have chosen today, at this location, within an hour of this specific event." She understood what he was not saying. He watched her process it, watched the careful neutrality on her face hold, and then crack at the edges, just slightly. Not with fear, but with something older and heavier. Exhaustion, maybe. The particular exhaustion of someone who has already suspected something for a long time and has just had that suspicion confirmed. "The safe house," he told Decker. "Which one?" "Linton Mill. And take the long way." They drove for 40 minutes, switching routes twice. Elena said nothing through most of it. She held her cut arm with her other hand and she looked out the window at the city moving past. Buildings and storefronts and ordinary people on ordinary afternoons. And Adrian watched her from the other side of the vehicle and thought about the contract he had signed 11 minutes before someone tried to kill her. He thought about Victor Hale, who had not attended his own daughter's wedding. He thought about the medical history he had read, and the line near the end of it that described severe scarring to the left side of Elena Hale's face and neck as a result of a residential fire at the family home in Westbrook, Elena's age at the time of the incident, 9 years. Cause of the fire, undetermined. Status of Elena's mother, Margot Hale, at time of incident, deceased. He had noted those details. He had filed them and moved on, because at the time they were background information, the history of a woman he was agreeing to a contractual arrangement with, not something requiring further examination. He examined them now. The safe house at Linton Mill was a converted warehouse space on the industrial edge of the city, 4 floors, reinforced externally, with the appearance of a derelict commercial property and the interior of a functioning operational base. Adrian's people used it rarely and never twice in the same month. He kept it off every record that existed, which was the entire point. Elena walked through the entrance without comment. She looked at the exposed ceiling beams, the security monitors, the 2 men who were already there and who straightened when Adrian came through the door, and she said nothing about any of it. He took her to a room on the 2nd floor with 2 chairs, a table, and a narrow window that faced the interior of the building rather than the street. He sat across from her. He looked at her arm, which had stopped bleeding. He put a first aid kit on the table between them without making it a conversation. She cleaned and dressed the cut herself. Her hands were steady. "Tell me about the fire," he said. She went very still. "I read your medical records," he said, "the ones Portis included in the contract documentation. There was a fire when you were 9. Your mother died. The cause was listed as undetermined." "I know what it was listed as." "What do you think it was?" The silence in the room was long and specific. Elena finished taping the bandage on her forearm and set the kit aside. She looked at the table for a moment, then at him. "My mother's name was Margot," she said. "Before she married my father, she was an investigative accountant. She was very good at it. After she married him, she stopped working professionally, but she never stopped looking at things." A pause. "At numbers, at where money went and where it came from and whether those 2 things matched." Adrian waited. "She found something," Elena said. "In the year before the fire, she started keeping files. I was 8, then 9. I didn't understand what she was doing, but I remember the files. She kept them in a locked cabinet in her study." She stopped. "The cabinet was in the part of the house that burned first." "You remember the fire?" "I remember everything about the fire." Her voice was flat when she said it, not numb. Flat in the specific way of someone who has told themselves a story about their own pain so many times that the words have worn smooth, like stones in moving water. They still mean something, they just no longer cut. "I woke up because of the smoke," she continued. "My room was at the back of the house. I got out through a window. My mother was in her study. By the time the firefighters found her, it was too late." A breath. "I was in the hospital for 6 weeks, 3rd-degree burns on my face and neck and left arm." "Your father," Adrian said. "He was in the city. A business dinner. He has alibi documentation for the entire evening." The way she said alibi documentation, not he wasn't there, not he had an alibi, but alibi documentation, as if she had thought about the distinction carefully and settled on the most precise version, told Adrian a great deal. "You think he arranged it," he said. "I think my mother found something that would have destroyed him," Elena said. "And I think 7 weeks later our house caught fire at 2 in the morning with her still inside, and I think the cabinet where she kept her files was the origin point of the blaze. And I think for 19 years my father has kept me quiet and isolated and dependent and far away from anyone who might listen to what I actually think about any of that." She said all of it evenly. No tears, no theatrical pause, just the facts, delivered by a woman who had had 19 years to decide whether she believed them and had come to a conclusion. Adrian leaned back in his chair. Outside the building, the city made its indifferent sounds. He thought about Victor Hale in that private club on the north side, sliding the arrangement across the table with the ease of a man who had done many such negotiations. He thought about the terms, the business connections, the political access, the expansion pathways into legitimate markets that Adrian had found genuinely attractive. He thought about what a man like Victor Hale would expect from that arrangement: a controlled situation, a daughter transferred from one form of containment to another, a problem that continued to be managed rather than resolved. And then someone had tried to kill her outside the courthouse, which meant the arrangement had not been Victor's primary solution to his problem. It had been a contingency, a delay, a way of getting Elena into a position where her death could be attributed to someone else entirely, to the violence that naturally accompanied a man like Adrian Voss. Mafia Boss's new wife killed in an attack targeting the Voss convoy. Clean, explainable. Victor Hale expressing grief from a safe distance. "The people who attacked us this afternoon," Adrian said, "they were not targeting me." Elena looked at him steadily. "I've had enemies for 15 years, he said again. "None of them have chosen today. None of them knew this location or this schedule. Only your father's people knew both." "Yes," she said. "He arranged the marriage so your death would be my problem to explain." "Yes." There was no flinching in her, no collapse. She said yes the way someone says it when they have already lived with a truth long enough that hearing it spoken aloud is not a revelation but a confirmation. Not relief exactly, but something adjacent to it. The relief of no longer being the only person in the room who knows the real shape of a thing. Adrian stood. He moved to the window that faced the building's interior, the raw overhead light and the exposed concrete of the space below. He stood there for a moment with his back to her. He had built his empire on a single principle: loyalty to the structure, not to individuals. People were variables. The organization was the constant. The moment he began making decisions based on personal feeling, based on something as unreliable as the anger he was experiencing right now, a specific and focused anger that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with a 9-year-old girl waking up in a burning house, that was the moment the structure began to corrode. He knew that. He turned back around. "Victor Hale thinks he's solved his problem," Adrian said. "He thinks you're contained. He thinks the attack failed, but there will be another opportunity." He looked at her directly. "He doesn't know yet that you've told me any of this." "No," Elena said. "He doesn't. That's the only advantage we have right now, and it won't last long." He came back to the table and stood across from her. "I need to know everything your mother found. Everything you know, everything you've pieced together in 19 years of paying attention to a man who thought you weren't paying attention." For the first time since she had walked through the courthouse doors, something changed in Elena Hale's expression. Not relief, not hope. Something more careful than either of those things. Something that had been locked down for a very long time and was now, slowly, considering the possibility that the lock might serve a different purpose than the one it had been built for. "There's a lot," she said. "Good," Adrian said. "We have time." But even as he said it, his phone buzzed on the table between them. A single message from Decker, no words, just a code he recognized immediately. The code meant someone had found the safe house. The phone sat on the table between them, and Adrian looked at it for exactly 2 seconds before he picked it up and typed back a single word to Decker. "How long?" The answer came in 4 seconds. 10 minutes, maybe less. Adrian pocketed the phone and looked at Elena. She had read his face, not the message, but his face, and she was already on her feet, the first aid kit pushed aside. Her posture changed from the careful stillness of a woman telling a painful story into something more alert and braced. She had picked up the shift in the room the way an animal picks up a change in air pressure before a storm. "We have to move," he said. "I heard. There's a stairwell at the back of the building. We go down, not up. There's a vehicle in the lower level, gray panel van. Keys are above the driver's visor. You get in, you stay down. You don't touch anything until I tell you." "Who found us?" "I don't know yet." "That's the problem, isn't it?" It was not a question. He did not answer it. He moved to the door and opened it and checked the corridor. Empty, the low industrial lighting unchanged, the smell of concrete and machine oil undisturbed, and he gestured for her to follow. They moved fast and quiet down the corridor, Adrian in front, Elena 2 steps behind, close enough that he could hear her breathing, controlled, through the nose, deliberate. No stumbling, no hesitation at the corners. He noted it, filed it. On the landing between the second and first floor, they passed Rilo coming up. "Perimeter?" Adrian said without stopping. East side is compromised. 2 vehicles, maybe 4 men. They're not rushing. They don't need to rush if they think they have the exits. Do they have the exits? No. Adrian kept moving. Get Decker and pull back to the lower level. We leave in 3 minutes. Rilo went back up without another word. The lower level of the Linton Mill building was exactly what it looked like from the outside. A former commercial loading area, concrete floor, 3 roll-up doors that had not functioned in years, and along the far wall, behind a partition constructed of steel shelving units loaded with crated equipment, 2 vehicles. The gray panel van was the nearer of the 2. Adrian went straight to it, pulled the driver door, reached above the visor, and found the keys. He handed them to Elena. She looked at him. You drive, he said. You don't know if I can drive. Can you? A beat. Yes. Then you drive. If something happens to me in the next 10 minutes, you keep going south on Merchant until you hit the rail underpass, then west on Callaway. There's a storage unit facility called Redline Self-Storage, Unit 44. The combination is 4 digits, the year your mother died. Inside is everything you'll need. Elena stared at him. You prepared for this. I prepare for everything. You prepared a contingency for me specifically. He did not explain it because there was no time, and because the explanation would have required him to articulate something he had not yet decided how to articulate. That he had read the medical records and the contract documentation, and something had not sat right. Something about the architecture of the arrangement had felt like a trap from the inside, and so he had done what he always did when a situation felt like a trap from the inside, which was to build himself a door. Get in, he said. Stay low until I tell you otherwise. Decker and Rilo came down the stairwell at a controlled jog. Behind them, another of Adrian's men, a heavyset man named Carr, who rarely spoke, but who Adrian trusted with specific categories of problem, and a younger woman named Sasha, who handled communications, and who is currently on a phone call she ended the moment she reached the lower level. 4 confirmed outside, Sasha said. 2 more on the roof of the building across the street. They've got eyes on the east and north roll-up doors. South loading door, Adrian said. It's not on their line of sight from the roof position. It's also welded shut, Decker said. Carr was already moving toward the south wall. The south loading door had been welded shut 18 months ago when Adrian had converted this section of the building for operational use. Welded from the inside, 2 solid beads along the bottom track, which meant it could be cut from the inside faster than it could be breached from the outside. Carr pulled a tool roll from behind the shelving partition and went to work with an angle grinder. No ceremony, sparks catching the concrete floor and dying. Adrian stood near the van and watched the stairwell door and the east side of the lower level simultaneously. Old habit. Never watch only one entrance when 2 are available to watch. His shoulder was tight, an old tension that lived in the left trapezius and activated when threat levels crossed a specific threshold. Not pain exactly, more like a physical record of previous damage reminding him it existed. He thought about who had found the safe house. Linton Mill was off every record. Not in the organization's operational documentation, not in any ledger, not connected to any of the front companies he used for property holding. He had purchased it under a shell company nested 3 layers deep, paid cash through a series of transfers that would take someone weeks to untangle. The only people who knew the location were the people in this room and 4 others who were not present. 4 others. He ran through them in the same way he ran through a balance sheet, looking for the discrepancy, the line that did not add up, the number that was slightly wrong in a way that only became visible when everything else checked out. Decker had been with him for 9 years, Carr for 7. The other 2 were names he trusted for operational reasons, but not necessarily personal ones. He would deal with that later. The angle grinder went silent. Carr stood back, and the south loading door shifted. Not open yet, but free of its weld, movable with enough force. Carr and Rilo hit it together, and it ground open along its track, scraping and unwilling, and the afternoon came in. Gray light, cool air, the smell of the service alley behind the building. Empty. Go, Adrian said. Elena had the van running before he reached the passenger side. He got in. She pulled forward without being told, navigating the angle of the door frame with a precision that suggested she was either naturally competent behind a wheel or had spent time being driven in tight spaces and understood intuitively how vehicles moved through them. Either way, she cleared the door without touching it and hit the alley and turned south. In the side mirror, Adrian watched the building recede. No pursuit from the alley. The people outside had the east and north covered and were presumably waiting for a negotiated exit or a breach from the front. They had not planned for the south. That told him something too. "You know how to follow a route under pressure," he said. "I've been moved between properties in a hurry before," Elena said. She kept her eyes on the alley, then on the street as she made the turn onto Merchant. "My father's security team used to do this when there were threats. They never told me what the threat was. They just moved me and told me to stay quiet." "How old were you?" "The first time? 11. 2 years after the fire." Adrian stared through the windshield at the street and thought about Victor Hale's security team running a traumatized 11-year-old through an emergency relocation drill and not bothering to explain why. "Keep to the speed limit," he said. "Don't run any lights." "I know." They drove. In the back of the van, Decker was on a phone. Sasha was monitoring communications on a tablet. Carr sat near the rear doors with his arms on his knees and his eyes on nothing in particular, the relaxed readiness of a man who has sat in the back of vehicles waiting to be needed many times. Relo, Adrian noticed, was very quiet. He had been quiet since the courthouse, not the useful quiet of a professional managing adrenaline, but a different kind. The tight, over-controlled quiet of someone working hard not to say or do anything that registered. Adrian watched Rilo in the visor mirror for 30 seconds. Then he looked away and said nothing. They reached the secondary location, an apartment building in the Fenwick district, 3rd floor, a unit registered to a name that did not exist, at 4:15. It was smaller than Linton Mill, no operational infrastructure, just a furnished space with covered windows and a second exit through the building's service stairs. Adrian had 3 locations like this in the city. This was the one no one in his organization knew about, except Decker. He told Carr and Sasha to sweep the floor and establish a perimeter on the stairwells. He told Rilo to stay in the main room. Then he took Decker into the kitchen. "Linton Mill," he said quietly. Decker kept his voice level. "I know. 4 names. I know. One of them told someone where we were. They told someone within 2 hours of us arriving, which means they were in contact before we even got there, or they contacted immediately on arrival." Decker's jaw worked. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, with a face that had accumulated evidence of a difficult life, a scar through the left eyebrow, a nose that had been broken and reset imperfectly, the weathered look of someone who had spent years outdoors in bad conditions doing difficult work. He was not a subtle man in most respects, but he was a loyal one, and Adrian had learned over 9 years to trust the specific quality of that loyalty. "Rilo," Decker said. Adrian waited. "He got a phone call during the sweep of the east side. I didn't think anything of it. He's got clearance for independent contacts during operational situations." Decker paused. "But the call was before you gave me the relocation order, so he knew we were going to Linton Mill before I confirmed the location to the team. Who told him?" "That's what I want to know." "Find out," Adrian said, quietly, "tonight." Decker nodded once and left the kitchen. Adrian stood at the counter and looked at the wall and breathed. The apartment smelled of someone else's cleaning products and stale air, the smell of a space that was maintained but not lived in. He was tired in a specific way, not physically, or not only physically, but in the way of a man who has spent 2 decades building a structure he trusted and has just discovered that the foundation has a crack he did not put there. He went back to the main room. Elena was sitting on the couch with her knees together and her hands folded, not anxious, arranged, the posture of someone who learned young to take up as little space as possible in rooms where her presence was conditional. She looked up when he came in. Rilo was near the window, not looking out, the blinds were down, but standing near it with the particular aimlessness of someone who wants to appear casual and does not quite manage it. "Rilo," Adrian said, "sit down." Rilo sat. He was 26, dark-haired, quick in the way that young men who have spent time in dangerous environments are quick, reflexively alert, not always strategically. He had come up through the organization's lower ranks 2 years ago. vouched for by a senior man who had since retired to a property in the Pacific Northwest and was, Adrian now reflected, unreachable by most conventional means. "Who contacted you before we relocated?" Adrian said. The room changed, not loudly. The change was in Rilo's body, a micro-adjustment in posture, the kind that happened below conscious thought, the kind that Adrian had learned to read the way other people read words on a page, a recalibration, a preparation. "I don't know what you mean," Rilo said. "Yes, you do. I got a call from—" "Don't tell me a name that isn't real," Adrian said. His voice was even, very even, which was, for anyone who knew him, more alarming than if he had raised it. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Who told you we were going to Linton Mill before Decker confirmed the relocation?" Silence. Elena was watching Rilo. She did not look afraid. She looked like someone watching a mechanism she had been told about but never seen operate up close, cataloging its components. "It wasn't supposed to go like this," Rilo said. "No," Adrian said. "It rarely is. The courthouse attack wasn't supposed to hit her." Rilo's eyes moved briefly to Elena and then back to Adrian, ashamed or something like it. "It was supposed to be a warning, a message to you that the arrangement was that you should walk away from it, from her. They said if you walked away, nothing else would happen." "Who said?" "I can't. Rilo." The name, delivered flat and quiet, was sufficient. Rilo's shoulders dropped. Not surrender exactly. More the physical expression of a man discovering that the thing he had been holding up is heavier than he thought, and he has been holding it too long. "Portis," he said. "Victor Hale's lawyer. He reached out 6 weeks ago, before the contract was even finalized. He said the old man was... He said Victor wanted someone inside your organization who could manage the situation if you agreed to the marriage. He said it was about containment, managing information." "Managing his daughter," Adrian said. Rilo said nothing. "He paid you?" "Yes." "And the location, you passed Linton Mill to Portis." Yes." Elena made a sound that was not quite a word. Not distress. Something harder than distress. Something that had been compressed over a long time and was now registering through the simple confirmation of yet another mechanism in a system that had been managing her existence for 19 years. She pressed her lips together and looked at the floor. Adrian looked at Rilo for a long moment. Rilo looked back. He was scared, properly, physically scared. And he was not doing a particularly good job of concealing it. "You're going to call Portis," Adrian said. "Right now. You're going to tell him the relocation was successful and we're secure at the Linton Mill location and that the situation is stable." Rilo blinked. "You want me to bet?" "You're going to tell him exactly that. Nothing else. And then you're going to give me the phone." The call took 40 seconds. Rilo's voice shook only slightly. When he disconnected, he held the phone out. Adrian took it, checked the call log, memorized the number Portis had been reached on, and pocketed it. "Decker," he said. Decker appeared from the hallway. He looked at Rilo. Rilo looked at the floor. "Find somewhere for him," Adrian said. He did not specify where. He did not need to. Decker understood the gradations of that instruction and would apply the appropriate one, which in this case, given that Rilo had fed a location rather than directly facilitated a killing, was somewhere confined rather than somewhere permanent. That distinction mattered to Adrian, even now, even with the specific cold anger sitting in his chest like something made of wire. He walked back to the couch and sat across from Elena. She looked up at him. Her face was doing the flat, careful thing again, the stone-in-water smoothness, but her eyes were doing something different, active, processing, the look of someone running calculations in real time. "Portis has been inside your organization for 6 weeks, she said. "Someone who worked for Portis has been. It's not the same thing, but the effect is similar. He'll know this location eventually." "Yes." "So we have hours. Maybe less, if Portis is paying attention to inconsistencies in what Rilo just told him." She absorbed that. Her hands, still folded in her lap, tightened fractionally. "What do we do?" It was not a helpless question. It was the same question she had asked in the street outside the courthouse, pressed flat behind the engine block with bullets crossing the air above her. How many are they here for you or me? Practical, forward-facing, stripped of everything that was not immediately useful. He looked at her and thought about what he had told her at Linton Mill before the message from Decker had ended that conversation. Victor Hale thinks he's solved his problem. He doesn't know yet that you've told me any of this. That's the only advantage we have. That advantage was eroding. Portis now knew that the marriage had produced something other than a contained problem, that Elena was not isolated and removed but present and talking. Victor Hale would recalibrate. He would understand that the proxy management approach had failed and move to something more direct, which meant the window for anything other than a defensive response was narrowing fast. You said your mother kept files, Adrian said, that the cabinet was in the part of the house that burned first. But you've had 19 years of living in your father's orbit, his houses, his offices, his network. You said you've been paying attention. I have. What do you have? Not files, not physical records. She held his gaze. But I remember things. Conversations I wasn't supposed to overhear. Names that appeared too frequently. A second set of accounts I saw on a screen in my father's study 7 years ago when he didn't know I was in the doorway. Account names. Account numbers, partial ones. And the name of the bank. And the name of the man who managed them, because my father called him by name during that conversation, and it was a name I already knew. It was Portis. Adrian went still. Portis manages money, he said. Portis manages the money that doesn't appear on any of my father's official financial disclosures, Elena said. I've believed that for 7 years. I've had no way to prove it, and no one to tell it to. You have someone to tell it to now. She looked at him steadily. Outside the apartment, the city made its sounds. Traffic, a distant siren. The particular ambient noise of a city that moved continuously and cared nothing for the specific people inside it. The light through the covered window was going gray. Evening coming. If I give you what I know, Elena said, and you go after my father using it, what happens to me if something goes wrong? If you can't finish it, or if someone inside your organization sells us again before we get there? The question was not self-pitying. It was the question of a woman who had learned the hard way to evaluate the durability of any protection being offered to her before she committed to depending on it. Adrian thought about the storage unit on Callaway Street, the combination that was the year her mother died. He had built that before he knew any of what she had just told him, when she was still an abstraction, a name in a contract, a variable in an arrangement he had not yet decided how to feel about. He had built it anyway. There is no scenario, he said, in which I leave you in a position where your father can reach you. That's not what I asked. No, he said, it isn't. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What you asked is whether I can guarantee this. I can't. I can tell you I have been in positions with worse odds and worse starting information, and I have come out the other side of all of them. I can tell you that what you just gave me, Portis, the accounts, the bank, is the kind of material that does not stay buried once someone who knows how to use it starts pulling on it. He paused. And I can tell you that Victor Hale made a significant error tonight. What error? He tried to manage you through other people, Adrian said. He put Portis in my organization. He arranged the attack to look like mafia business. He stayed at arm's length from all of it. He held her gaze. That's how a man operates when he's protecting something, when he's scared of exposure. If he weren't scared, he'd have been direct 6 months ago. Elena was quiet for a moment. He's been scared of exposure since the fire, she said softly. Yes. Because whatever my mother found, it's still there. He never cleaned it up. He just buried it. Which means it can be unburied. She breathed in slowly through her nose. The cut on her arm was visible below her rolled sleeve, the bandage slightly askew. She had been shot at, relocated twice, discovered a traitor in the room, and she was sitting here doing math. I'll tell you everything I know, she said. Tonight, he said, because tomorrow we start making moves. But before she could answer, Sasha appeared in the doorway with her tablet and her face in the expression it got when the information on it was worse than expected. Adrian, she said, Portis isn't waiting. There are 3 vehicles on Fenwick right now, 1 block north, and they're not moving. Adrian stood. Elena stood. They found us again, she said. It was not a question. No, Adrian said, and the single word landed like something dropped from a height. Relo made a second call. He turned toward the hallway, toward the service stairs, toward the next move in a situation that had just shifted from reactive to something he had not faced in a long time. A situation in which someone inside his own structure had burned not 1 location but 2, which meant the breach was not a single bad actor acting alone, which meant the damage ran deeper than Rilo, which meant the organization he had spent 15 years building with absolute control had a wound he had not known existed until tonight. And Victor Hale, careful, patient, arm's-length Victor Hale, had known about it before he did. The service stairs were narrow and smelled of rust and old concrete, and Adrian took them 2 at a time with Elena 1 step behind him and Sasha at the rear, the tablet tucked under her arm, her other hand on the wall for balance in the dark. Decker was already at the ground-level door when they reached it. He had his hand flat against the metal surface, not pushing, listening. His face in the dim stairwell light was concentrated and still. Back alley, he said quietly. 1 man, east end. He's not moving. Watching the exit, Adrian said, or waiting for someone to flush us out the front. Adrian thought for 2 seconds. The building had 3 ground-level exits. The lobby entrance on Fenwick, the service door on the alley, and a utility access on the building's south wall that connected to the adjacent property through a shared maintenance corridor. The utility access was on no floor plan that had been updated in the last decade. He had found it during his initial walkthrough of the property and had noted it the way he noted all secondary exits, automatically, without particular expectation of needing it. South wall, he said, maintenance corridor. Takes us through to the Carver Street side. Decker looked at him. You scouted that. I scout everything. They moved back up half a flight and through a fire door into the building's utility level. Pipes, electrical panels, the mechanical infrastructure of a building that was older than it looked. The kind of space that smelled permanently of something burning slowly and harmlessly in a wall somewhere. The corridor was low-ceilinged and tight, and Carr, bringing up the rear with his broad frame, had to tilt his head to clear a hanging conduit. Elena moved through it without complaint. In the near dark, she stayed close to Adrian's shoulder, not grabbing for him, not falling behind, just present and calibrated to his pace the way someone calibrates to the pace of the only reliable thing in a moving situation. The maintenance corridor led out through a utility door that required a key Adrian did not have. He looked at it for 1 second. Carr pulled a short pry bar from somewhere in his jacket. 30 seconds later, the door was open. Carver Street was quiet. Mid-block, residential buildings on both sides, a laundromat with its lights still on, a woman walking a dog 50 yards north who did not look in their direction. No vehicles sitting with engines idling, no men standing where men didn't need to stand. They walked out in 2 groups of 3, casual spacing, the way people who are not together walk out of a building. Adrian did not exhale. He did not exhale for another 20 minutes, until they were in the basement level of a parking structure on Callow Avenue, inside a vehicle registered to a company that had never existed at an address that was a vacant lot. And Sasha had swept for tracking devices and found nothing, and Carr had done 1 circuit of the structure's access ramps and come back with a clean signal. Then he exhaled. Elena sat in the back of the vehicle with her arms crossed, not hugging herself, braced, like someone who has been bracing for a long time and has simply stopped noticing that's what they're doing. She was looking at the concrete pillar directly in front of the car. Her jaw was set. Rilo made a second call, she said. Yes. From inside the apartment, while Decker was with you in the kitchen. Yes. So he had a second phone? Yes. She turned and looked at Adrian. How long has he been inside your organization? 2 years? And in 2 years you didn't know. It was not an accusation. It was flat, declarative, the voice she used when she was placing a fact in a sequence of facts to understand what the sequence meant. Adrian recognized the quality of it because he did the same thing, had always done the same thing, and it was unusual to encounter it in someone else delivered in exactly that register. No, he said. I didn't know. Portis recruited him 6 weeks ago, That's what Rilo said. That's what Rilo said. But a man like Portis doesn't recruit an inside contact 6 weeks before he needs one. He identifies the contact, builds the relationship, tests the loyalty. That takes months. She held his gaze. Rilo has been compromised longer than 6 weeks. He told you 6 weeks because that's the number Portis would have told him to use if the question ever came up. Adrian looked at her for a moment. You're good at this, he said. I had a good teacher, she said. My father spent 19 years showing me exactly how this kind of thing works from the other side. He took out the phone he had confiscated from Rilo and looked at the call history again. The call to Portis during the Linton Mill relocation. A second number, different, not Portis, called twice in the last 6 hours. The second number had a city code he recognized, not local. He showed it to Sasha. Sasha looked at it, looked at him, and said, That's a Westbrook exchange. Westbrook. Victor Hale's estate. Not Portis. Victor directly. Rilo had not been recruited by Victor's lawyer. He had been recruited by Victor himself. Portis was the explanation offered to limit damage if the contact was burned. The real handler was the man at the top, which meant the penetration of Adrian's organization was not a tactical move by a cautious corporate criminal covering a specific exposure. It was a strategic operation that had been running for a significant period of time, targeting Adrian directly, before the marriage had ever been proposed. Victor had known, before he walked into that private club on the north side and proposed the arrangement over single malt whiskey, that he had a line inside Adrian's structure. He had known before he offered the deal that he had a way to manage the outcome if the deal went wrong. Adrian sat with that for a long time. In the parking structure, the sound of a vehicle on an upper level, tires on concrete, fading. Car near the access ramp. Decker leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching Adrian with the careful attention of a man waiting to see what shape the decision is going to take. Decker, Adrian said. Yeah. How long have you known Rilo? A pause, the kind of pause that had weight in it. I vouched for him, Decker said. You know I vouched for him. I know. How long have you known him? I met him through Garner, when Garner was still active. They came up together through the East Side operation 2.5 years ago. Decker's jaw tightened. If Rilo was placed, Garner is the vector. And Garner is in the Pacific Northwest. Unreachable, Decker said quietly. Yeah. The shape of it was becoming clear, and the shape was worse than Adrian had initially calculated. Not a single compromised contact, a seeded network. Garner placing Rilo inside the organization, Portis providing financial management and legal cover, Victor at the center of all of it, patient and distant and arranging. A man who had been managing exposure and liability for 19 years had applied exactly those skills to the problem of Adrian Voss, and he had started applying them before Adrian even knew he was a problem to be managed. Adrian pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose. He held them there for 3 seconds. Then he dropped his hand and looked at Elena. Your father proposed this arrangement to me 4 months ago, he said. I know. Portis told me it was being discussed. I wasn't consulted. 4 months ago, Rilo was already inside. That means Victor had intelligence on my operations, my locations, my personnel, for at least that long. He stopped. Maybe longer. Elena said nothing. She was watching him with those direct dark eyes, and he could see her doing the same thing he was doing, running the sequence backward, finding the earlier point, the point before the point, the original source of the contamination. He didn't propose this to protect you, Adrian said. I know. He proposed it because he had intelligence suggesting I was considering an expansion into legitimate markets. Political connections, business infrastructure, the things he offered me in the contract. He knew those were things I wanted because someone inside my organization told him. He used what you wanted, Elena said, to build a box around you. Yes, and I was the lid. She said it without self-pity, just the geometry of it, laid out flat. The marriage puts you inside my protection structure, Adrian said, which he knows the layout of, which means any time he decides to resolve the situation with you, with me, with both. He has advanced intelligence on exactly how to do it. He's been patient for 19 years, Elena said. He can be patient a little longer. Move when the moment is clean. Yes. So the question is whether we give him a clean moment. We don't, Adrian said. How? He looked at the phone in his hand. The Westbrook exchange number. Victor's direct line to Rilo, which was now in Adrian's possession, which meant it was a line that could receive a call from a voice that was not Rilo's. Victor would not answer a number he didn't recognize, but he would answer Rilo's number. The problem was that Adrian's voice was not Rilo's voice, and Victor Hale had been managing intelligence operations long enough to know the difference. He looked at Sasha. Sasha was already looking at him with the expression of someone who has heard an idea that hasn't been spoken yet and is calculating whether it's executable. She was 24 years old and had come to Adrian's organization from a background she described as communications, which covered a range of activities that went well beyond the word's conventional meaning. I can't do a voice match in a parking garage, she said. No, but we don't need a voice match. He looked back at the phone. We need to know what Victor thinks he knows right now, what Rilo's last report told him, what he believes the current situation is. You want to let him think he's still ahead, Decker said. I want to understand exactly how far ahead he thinks he is before I decide what to do with that information. He pocketed the phone. The decision was made in the way most of his decisions were made. Not announced, not explained, simply arrived at and then acted on, the deliberation invisible to everyone in the room, except in retrospect. We need somewhere to work, he said. Not a safe house. Not anywhere connected to the organization's operational footprint. Somewhere clean. I know a place, Elena said. Everyone in the vehicle looked at her. She met their collective attention without flinching. My mother had a sister, my Aunt Lena. She left the country when I was 12. She and my father had a significant falling out that I was never told the details of, but she maintained a property in the East Ham district that she kept in her own name. She never sold it. I've checked the property records twice in the last 5 years. A beat. My father doesn't know it exists because my aunt made sure he didn't, and whatever falling out they had, it was sufficient to keep him from looking for anything connected to her name. Your aunt, Adrian said. She's not in the country, but the property is sitting empty, and I know where the key is. You've been there. Once. 3 years ago. She held his gaze. I went there to feel close to my mother. They were sisters. The property still has some of her things. She paused. And before you ask, I haven't told anyone about it. I've never had anyone to tell. The East Ham district was 40 minutes southwest of their current position. They drove there through the kind of Thursday night city traffic that was heavy enough to be anonymous and thin enough to move through without difficulty. Sasha navigated, car drove. Adrian sat in the back with Elena and did not speak for most of the drive. At some point she said, quietly, not looking at him, 2 locations compromised in one night. Yes. Your people are looking at you differently. He glanced at her. She was still watching the city through the tinted window. Decker isn't, she said, but the others. Let them. Does it bother you? He considered the question seriously. It was the kind of question that, from most people, he would not have considered at all, would have filed under irrelevant or deflected with the kind of response that ended the inquiry. From her, it landed differently. She was not asking whether his feelings were hurt. She was asking whether the shift in his organization's internal confidence posed a functional problem. Not yet, he said. What makes it a problem? When they start making decisions based on doubt instead of direction. She nodded slowly, like someone confirming a hypothesis. The property in Eastham was a narrow 2-story house on a residential block, dark and clearly unoccupied, the small front garden slightly overgrown but not abandoned. Elena directed Carr to a side street and they walked in through the rear, through a back garden where an old metal table sat under a leafless tree. She found the key under a loose brick in the back step, third from the left, and she held it in her hand for a moment before she used it. The house inside smelled of dust and something older. Cedar, maybe, or the specific smell of a closed space that had once been regularly lived in. Elena reached for a lamp rather than the overhead light, and the room came up in low, warm yellow. A sitting room. Old furniture, carefully covered. A bookshelf. A photograph on the wall that Elena did not look at directly when she first came in. Adrian looked at the photograph. Two women, one of whom had Elena's eyes, standing in a garden somewhere, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. He looked away. They worked through the night. Sasha set up her equipment on the kitchen table. Adrian and Decker went through everything Elena could give them. The partial account numbers, the bank name, the name Portis had been called during that overheard conversation 7 years ago, the timeline of financial activity she had observed or inferred during 19 years inside Victor Hale's orbit. Elena sat at the table and she talked, and Sasha captured and cross-referenced, and Adrian listened in the way he had always listened, the way that felt to other people like silence, but was actually the most active thing he did. Building architecture from incoming information, testing it for structural weakness, finding where the load-bearing elements were. By 2 a.m, they had a shape. It was not complete. But it was enough of a shape to see what it was, the way you can see what a building is going to be from its steel frame before the walls go up. Victor Hale's legitimate empire, the industrial holdings, the real estate, the investment portfolios that appeared in his corporate filings and made him one of the wealthiest men in the region, was real. It existed. It generated real revenue. But beneath it, running parallel and invisible, was a second structure that had been operating for at least 23 years, possibly longer. Shell companies nested inside other shell companies. Transfer mechanisms that moved money through 3 jurisdictions before it appeared anywhere traceable. And at the center of the second structure, managing it, signing the documents, holding the keys, not Victor Hale, whose name appeared nowhere in the secondary architecture, but Portis. He laundered himself out of it entirely, Sasha said, staring at her screen. Victor's fingerprints are not on any of this directly. It's all Portis, which means if the secondary structure is exposed, Decker said slowly, Portis takes the criminal liability. And Victor is a victim of a trusted advisor who betrayed him, Elena said. Her voice was completely flat. He's been positioning for that defense for 20 years. Portis is his exit strategy. The silence in the kitchen was very specific. Adrian leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. The kitchen light was old fluorescent, slightly warm, flickering imperceptibly in the way of old fixtures. He thought about the shape of what they had built over the last 6 hours, and he thought about its weaknesses, and the primary weakness was not evidentiary. The trail Sasha was pulling together was solid enough to be damaging. The primary weakness was structural. There's no direct link, he said. No, Sasha said. We can show the secondary structure. We can show Portis at the center of it. We can establish the shell companies, the transfers, the timeline. But without a direct documented instruction from Victor to Portis, a communication, a signed order, something that puts Victor's hand on the mechanism, what we have is a case against a lawyer, not a case against a billionaire. My mother had it, Elena said. The room went quiet again. She was looking at the table. Whatever she found, Elena said, whatever was in those files, it wasn't just the secondary structure, it was the link, the direct connection. She found the thing that put Victor's hand on the mechanism, and that's why she's dead. And the files burned with her. Yes. She paused. Or, she stopped. Adrian looked at her. Or, she pressed her lips together. Something was moving behind her eyes. Not reluctance, but the specific expression of someone who has been sitting on a thought for a long time and is now deciding whether the moment to release it has arrived. My mother was careful, Elena said. She was an investigative accountant. She built cases. She understood redundancy. A breath. She kept the files in the cabinet in her study, the cabinet that burned first. But I've been thinking about this for 19 years, and I keep coming back to something I remember from 3 weeks before the fire. No one moved. I was 9, Elena said. I came into the kitchen in the morning and my mother was talking to my aunt on the phone, Aunt Lena. They were speaking quietly, and I caught only a few words, but one thing I caught clearly because my mother said it twice. She looked at the table, then at Adrian. She said, I already sent you the copies. The room did not breathe. Adrian straightened in his chair slowly. Your aunt, he said. Lena, Elena said. Who had a falling out with your father shortly after the fire? Who left the country? Who kept this property in Eastham and never sold it? Elena's eyes were steady on his. Who kept some of my mother's things here? Adrian stood up. He looked at Sasha. Sasha was already looking at the doorway that led from the kitchen to the sitting room and then to the stairs. Where? He said. I don't know, Elena said. I've been here once. I didn't search. I didn't know to search. She stood. But Lena kept my mother's things. She kept them here specifically, not at an address connected to herself, not somewhere she could be found with them. She paused. I think she kept them here because if anything ever happened to her, she wanted someone to be able to find them without needing to know where to look. You, Adrian said. I'm the only one who knew this property existed. They searched the house. It was not a large property. Sitting room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms upstairs, a small bathroom, and a narrow storage room at the end of the upper hall that was accessible through a door that looked like a wall panel until you knew to look for the seam. Elena found it. She ran her hand along the wall the way someone runs their hand along a thing they half remember, feeling for a specific texture, and her fingers found the edge of the panel and she pressed inward and the door opened. Inside the storage room were boxes, old ones, uniform, sealed with packing tape that had yellowed and dried but still held. 8 boxes stacked in 2 columns. And on top of the left column, a single manila envelope, unsealed, with a piece of paper folded inside it. Elena picked up the envelope. Her hands were not steady now. They were shaking in the specific small way of someone who is trying to hold still and cannot entirely manage it. She unfolded the paper. She read it. She read it twice. She put it down on the nearest box and stepped back and pressed both hands flat on the surface behind her and breathed with her eyes closed. Adrian picked up the paper. It was a letter, handwritten, dated 3 weeks before the fire. Margot Hale to Lena, 2 pages in a handwriting that was controlled and very clear, the handwriting of a woman who had been trained in precision and applied it to everything. The letter described the contents of the boxes, the documentation Margot had assembled over 3 years of observation, the secondary financial structure, the shell companies, the transfer mechanisms, and at the end of the second page, in a paragraph that was written slightly smaller than the rest, as if she had run out of space or wanted to compress the most critical part into something that would not immediately draw the eye, a description of a specific document, a signed instruction from Victor Hale to Portis, dated 8 years before the letter, authorizing the establishment of the primary shell company, the first one, the foundation of the entire secondary structure, and in that authorization, using language that was explicit about the purpose. Not business development language, not the language of legitimate tax management, language that described in precise terms what the money was, where it came from, and why it needed to disappear. Margot had photographed it. The photographs were in box 4. Adrian set the letter down. He looked at the boxes. He looked at Elena, who was standing with her back to the opposite wall and her eyes open now, looking at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before. Not relief, not triumph, not grief, but something that was all 3 of those things at once, and something else underneath them, something raw and very old. He was about to speak when his phone buzzed. Not the phone in his pocket, the phone he had taken from Rilo, which he had set on the box beside him while he read the letter. It was buzzing with an incoming call. The screen showed the Westbrook exchange number. Victor Hale was calling Rilo. At 2:17 in the morning, which meant Victor knew something had gone wrong, which meant whatever intelligence he had inside the organization, Rilo or something deeper than Rilo, had told him the situation was no longer what he believed it to be. He was not calling to receive a routine report. He was calling because he was checking whether his line was still live. Adrian looked at the phone. He looked at Elena. She straightened away from the wall. She looked at the phone and then at him, and she said very quietly, "Give it to me." "You can't. I'm his daughter," she said. "He hasn't spoken to me directly in 4 months. If he hears my voice on Rilo's phone, it tells him exactly one thing. That Rilo has been compromised and you have the phone." "Yes," which tells him the boxes are found or will be found, which tells him he's out of time. She held his gaze. "Which forces him into the open." The phone was still buzzing. "If he goes to ground, we lose him," she said. He has resources to disappear. He has structures we haven't found yet. If he knows we have the documentation but can't reach him, he burns everything and builds somewhere else and starts over, and he has done this before." Her voice was still quiet, but underneath the quiet was something that had been compressed for 19 years and was now taking up exactly the space it required. "I am the only thing that brings him out." The phone buzzed again. Adrian held it out. She took it. She answered it. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Half a second, the recalibration of a man who had expected a different voice and was now processing the voice he was hearing. Then Victor Hale said, "Elena." And Elena said, in a voice that did not shake at all, "Hello, Father. We need to talk." Victor Hale did not hang up. That was the first thing Adrian noted. Standing in the storage room of a dead woman's sister's house at 2:17 in the morning, watching Elena hold a dead man's phone to her ear, watching her face do something he had not seen it do before, which was go completely, unnaturally still, the way a surface goes still when everything underneath it has stopped moving. Victor did not hang up, and he did not speak again immediately. The silence on the line lasted 4 seconds. Adrian counted them. Then Victor said, "Where are you?" Not a question. A command dressed as a question. The syntax of a man who had been issuing commands for so long, the interrogative form had become a formality. Elena said, "Somewhere you won't find." "Elena." His voice was measured, careful, the voice of a man who is recalibrating in real time and doing it well. "Whatever he's told you, he hasn't told me anything you didn't already know," Elena said. "He didn't have to." A pause. Shorter this time. "You sound like your mother," Victor said. Elena's jaw tightened, one small, visible movement, quickly controlled. "I know." She thought she was protecting you too. She thought what she was doing was constructive. The word arrived with a weight that was not grief. It was the weight of a man who had long ago categorized a dead woman's actions and filed them and moved past them. It wasn't. It made things worse for everyone. "She's dead, Father." "Yes." Just that. Yes. Flat and final. The monosyllable of a man who had made peace with a fact that had never troubled him the way it was supposed to. Elena looked at Adrian. Her eyes were doing the calculation again, the rapid internal assessment, and what she was assessing was time, how long she could keep him on the line, how much he would reveal, where the leverage was. Adrian gave her a single nod. "Keep going." "I have the boxes," Elena said. The silence this time was different. It had texture. It had the specific quality of air in a room where something has just shifted its weight. "What boxes?" Victor said. "Mother's copies." "Aunt Lena kept them. You didn't know about them." No response. 23 years of documentation, Elena said. The secondary structure, the shell companies, the transfer records, and the signed authorization from Udaportis establishing the first account. She paused, with the language explaining what the money was. Victor breathed. She could hear it. They could all hear it. The room was very quiet. Sasha and Decker and Carr all motionless in the hallway and the kitchen, listening to the sound of a man at the end of a phone line, understanding that his architecture had a room in it he had never known existed. "What do you want?" he said. "I want to meet Elena tomorrow morning in public." She looked at Adrian. He held up 3 fingers, then pointed at his own chest. "Adrian will choose the location. You come with no more than 3 people. We come the same. And if I don't? Then by 9 tomorrow morning, the documentation is with 3 separate investigative journalists and 2 federal regulatory bodies. A beat. And I go on camera and tell them everything I know from memory, which is considerable." The silence stretched. "Tomorrow," Victor said. "Where?" Adrian wrote a single word on the notepad on the box beside him and held it up. Elena read it. "Hale Tower," she said. "The shareholder meeting room. You have a board session scheduled for 10 o'clock tomorrow. We'll be there at 9:30. A long silence. "You've done your research," Victor said. "I had help." She disconnected the call. She stood with the phone in her hand and she breathed. 1 breath, 2. The careful, measured breathing of someone who has just done something that cannot be undone and is now living in the moment immediately after it. Her hands were shaking again. She did not try to hide it. Adrian took the phone from her gently. "You did well," he said. She looked at him. "Don't patronize me." "I'm not. You did well. That's a fact." She sat down on one of the boxes. The storage room was very small with both of them in it, and the 8 boxes and the decades of her mother's work stacked in careful columns around them. She put her elbows on her knees and her face in her hands for a moment. Not crying, not collapsing, just taking 30 seconds to exist inside a situation without having to manage it. Adrian let her have it. Then she looked up. "He'll come with more than 3 people." "Yes." "He'll have a plan for the meeting." "Yes." "He's going to try to take the documentation before we can use it." "He's going to try," Adrian said. They worked for the rest of the night. Sasha photographed every document in Box 4, the signed authorization letter, the transfer records, the shell company documentation, and distributed the photographs across 4 encrypted channels to 3 separate contacts. Not journalists yet, not the regulatory bodies Elena had mentioned on the phone, but people Adrian trusted to hold material and release it on instruction, people whose loyalty was of the specific, uncomplicated kind that came from obligation rather than ideology and was therefore reliable. By 4 in the morning, the documentation existed in 5 locations simultaneously, none of which were connected to the Eastham property or to Adrian's organizational infrastructure. If Victor moved against them tonight, the materials survived. That was the floor. Everything above it was a question of how tomorrow went. Decker found a hardware store 3 blocks away that opened at 6 and came back with 2 industrial bolt locks for the front and rear doors of the property. Carr slept for 4 hours on the sitting room floor with the particular skill of a man who had learned to sleep anywhere when sleep was available, a weapon within reach, and was upright and alert when Decker woke him at 5:30. Elena slept in the smaller upstairs bedroom on a narrow bed under a window, and Adrian sat in the chair near the door and did not sleep at all. He sat and thought about Victor Hale. He thought about him the way he thought about all serious problems, not with anger, which was a fuel that burned hot and fast and left you operating on fumes, but with the cold, specific attention of a man inventorying a threat. Victor was 71 years old. He had built a legitimate empire from the platform of his father's smaller enterprise and had, in parallel, constructed an entirely separate architecture of managed corruption that had survived 2 decades of regulatory environment, 3 economic downturns, and the death of the one person who had gotten close to exposing it. He was patient, he was resourceful, he was not a man who panicked, and he had spent the last several months running an intelligence operation against Adrian's organization that had produced results. He was also, Adrian thought, a man who believed he controlled the frame. Every move Victor had made, the marriage proposal, Rilo's placement, the attack outside the courthouse, the Linton Mill location, had been designed to keep the situation inside a frame that Victor controlled. Where exposure happened, who took liability, what the narrative looked like from the outside. His response to Elena's call tonight would follow the same logic. He would agree to the meeting because agreeing put him inside the frame. He would use the meeting to reassert the frame. Adrian's job tomorrow was to remove the frame entirely. At 7 in the morning, he went upstairs and knocked on the bedroom door. Elena opened it immediately. She had not slept either, or had slept briefly and was now fully present, dressed, her hair back. The room behind her was neat. She had not disarranged it, had slept on top of the cover rather than under it, had left everything as she found it with the particular habit of someone who has spent a long time occupying other people's spaces without being permitted to mark them. "Ready?" he said. "Yes," she said. Hale Tower was a 40-story steel and glass structure in the commercial center of the city, the kind of building that communicated its owner's self-conception in its architecture. Imposing, expensive, reflective, designed to show you yourself diminished in its surface as you approached it. The shareholder meeting room was on the 38th floor, all glass walls and a long oval table that sat 30 and was usually set with water pitchers and notepads and the specific atmosphere of performed corporate legitimacy. They arrived at 9:22. The lobby security recognized Elena and let them through without a call upstairs, which meant either Victor had cleared their access in advance or the security team had standing instructions regarding Victor Hale's daughter that superseded normal protocol. Either way, they rode the elevator to 38 without obstruction, Adrian, Elena, Decker, and Carr. Sasha remained at the Eastham property with the boxes and the distribution contacts on standby. The meeting room was already occupied. Victor Hale sat at the far end of the oval table. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders even now, with white hair cut short and a face that had aged well in the way of men who have spent their lives insulated from consequence. Unweathered, controlled, the face of a man whose exterior had never quite matched what was happening underneath it. He wore a dark suit. His hands were flat on the table in front of him. He had not come with 3 people. He had come with 6. 4 of them were positioned around the room, not seated, standing, at the walls, at the door to the adjoining corridor. Security, but the kind whose specific training was visible if you knew what to look for. The 5th was Portis, seated to Victor's right, a thin stack of documents on the table in front of him. The 6th was a man Adrian did not recognize, seated to Victor's left, heavy-set, with the particular stillness of someone waiting for permission to move. Adrian scanned the room in the first 2 seconds and assigned threat levels and noted exit points and identified the man to Victor's left as the primary variable, unknown, positioned to act, the one element that didn't fit the pattern of lawyers and contracted security. He filed it and sat down. Elena sat beside him. She looked at her father across the length of the oval table, and Victor looked back at her, and the look between them was a long one that contained 19 years of specific and irreparable history, and neither of them flinched from it. "You look well," Victor said. "Don't," Elena said. He accepted that with a small nod. "The boxes," he said, "copied, distributed, sitting with people who will release them on a predetermined schedule regardless of what happens in this room." Victor's eyes moved to Adrian. "Your work." "Her idea," Adrian said. It was true. It had been Elena's call to distribute before the meeting, to remove the material from the negotiation as a leverageable asset and convert it into a standing threat that required no further action to activate. Victor registered the attribution, and something shifted very slightly in his expression. Not surprise, but the specific adjustment of a man revising an assessment he had held for a long time. "You were always like her," he said to Elena. "You said that last night." "I meant it as a compliment then, too." He paused. "Your mother was exceptional. She was also... She lacked judgment about what to do with what she found." "She tried to stop you," Elena said. "She tried to expose me," Victor said, with the tone of a man making a factual correction. "Those are not the same thing. Exposing me would not have stopped anything. It would have destroyed the family, collapsed the business, and hurt people who depended on it. She didn't think about any of that. She thought about the principle. And that's why she's dead." The room did not move. The 6 men at the walls and in the chairs did not move. Victor did not move. "I did not make that decision lightly," he said. Elena made a sound that was not a word. It was short and involuntary, the sound of someone who has been holding a very large thing and has just been told by the person who handed it to them that it was carefully chosen. She pressed her lips together. She held. Adrian looked at Victor Hale and felt the wire thing in his chest, the cold specific anger, rearrange itself into something cleaner and more permanent. "You're admitting it," Adrian said. "I'm not admitting anything to you," Victor said. "I'm speaking to my daughter." "In front of witnesses." Victor's eyes moved around the room. "My witnesses," he said. "In my building." He looked back at Adrian. "You're intelligent enough to have thought about what happens after this meeting. You have the documentation. You've distributed it. But documentation requires context, and context requires a living, credible source to provide it. Without that..." He let the sentence complete itself. "You need us not to walk out of this room," Adrian said. "I need the situation to resolve cleanly," Victor said. "I've needed that for 19 years. The method has changed. The requirement hasn't." The man to Victor's left shifted in his chair. Adrian's hand was on the table. He did not move it. He looked at the man, heavy-set, patient, the waiting quality. And he looked at the door to the adjoining corridor, and he thought about the layout of the 38th floor, and the elevator bank, and the 2 stairwells, and the specific geometry of what was being offered to him as an exit, and what was being positioned as the alternative. Elena said, "Look at me." Victor looked at her. "You told me my mother lacked judgment," she said. about what to do with what she found. Her voice was very controlled, very quiet, the stone in water voice. But underneath it now was something that had not been there before. Not anger exactly, and not grief, but the thing that exists past both of those. The thing that emerges when a person has finally run out of the ability to hope that they have been wrong about someone. You built something real. Whatever else you did, you built something that existed and employed people and had value. And then you protected it by burning your house down with my mother inside it. Elena, and then you spent 19 years managing me, moving me, controlling who I saw and what I heard and where I could go. She paused. Not because you were protecting me. You were managing your exposure, she said. I was a witness. I was 9 years old, and I was a witness, and everything you did for 19 years was about keeping that witness contained. Victor's jaw tightened, the first visible crack in the surface. The documentation will come out, Elena said. It's already in motion. But you know what actually destroys you? Not the financial records, not the shell companies. She held his gaze across the length of the table. It's me. It's me sitting in front of a camera and saying what I just said. What you just told me here, in your building, with your lawyers and your security and everything you've built around yourself, and saying that you said it. No one will believe, they will believe me, she said, because I have been hiding my face for 19 years and I am done hiding it. And when a woman who has been hiding for 19 years stops hiding, people pay attention. The room was very quiet. Victor looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he looked at Adrian. The look was different, stripped of the managed quality, the controlled surface, and underneath it something that was not quite recognizable as any specific emotion, but was the general texture of a man watching the structure he built reach the end of its load-bearing capacity. Then he said one word to the man on his left. The man stood. Decker was moving before the man had fully cleared his chair, and Carr was 2 steps behind, and the room went from still to violently in motion in the span of a breath. The man from Victor's left was fast, trained, focused, reaching inside his jacket with practiced efficiency. And Decker hit him before the reach completed, the collision of 2 large men with entirely different purposes, crashing into the side of the oval table and taking 2 chairs with them. Adrian grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her toward the door. One of Victor's security men was already there. Adrian hit him with the specific, economical violence of someone who has done this many times and has no interest in it taking longer than necessary. A palm strike to the throat, a knee to the inside of the man's thigh, the man folding forward and out of the doorway. Elena was through it before the man hit the ground. Adrian went through after her. The corridor outside was long and carpeted and empty, the glass-walled offices on either side dark. The building not yet fully populated at 9:30 in the morning. At the end of the corridor, the elevator bank and the stairwell door. Stairs, he said. She was already running. Behind them, from the meeting room, the sounds of a fight not yet resolved. Decker's voice, something heavy hitting glass, a door. Adrian did not look back. He hit the stairwell door and held it for Elena, and they went down 2 steps at a time, 38 floors, the kind of descent that punishes the knees and burns the thighs and fills the lungs with the thin, echo-heavy air of concrete fire stairs. On the 22nd floor landing, he heard the door above them open. He grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her through the 22nd floor door into the office space. An open-plan floor, rows of workstations, early arrivals at desks who looked up with the startled expressions of people whose morning has just been interrupted by 2 people running through it. He moved through the space toward the window line, toward the south side of the building, toward the secondary elevator bank that served the building's conference floors and was separate from the main bank. Elena ran beside him without stumbling. The secondary elevators were slow. He punched the button and they stood for 11 seconds that felt like something much longer, while the display above showed the car ascending from the 14th floor. Elena was breathing hard, controlled but hard, the breath of real exertion, her face flushed, her posture still upright and forward. She had not asked him where they were going. She trusted that he knew. He was not certain he knew. The car arrived. They got in. He hit the lobby button and then the door close button, and the doors closed and the car began to descend. and Adrian leaned against the wall of the elevator car and breathed. His phone buzzed. Sasha. He answered it. 3 vehicles just pulled in front of the building, Sasha said. Municipal plates. Not police. The configuration is wrong. Private, government adjacent. Victor's political contacts, Adrian said. They're setting a perimeter on the lobby exits. How long? They're already there. Adrian looked at Elena. She had heard. Service entrance, she said immediately. Loading dock on the north side. I know this building. I've been in it since I was a child. She looked at him. There's a freight elevator on the north side that goes to the basement parking level. It connects to a service tunnel that runs under the block to the adjacent property. You know where the tunnel exits? Maintenance access on Vantage Street, behind the dry cleaning place on the corner. He looked at her. How do you know that? I used to explore when my father had long meetings, she said. I was bored and I had nothing else to do, and nobody ever stopped me because nobody thought I was paying attention. He almost said something. He held it. Show me, he said. She took them to the freight elevator. It was at the end of a service corridor accessed through a fire door marked staff only, that Elena pushed through without hesitation, moving through the building's back infrastructure with the assurance of someone navigating a space they memorized a long time ago and have never needed until now. The freight elevator was larger than a standard car, slow, smelling of cardboard and machine oil. They descended to the basement parking level, moved through a concrete service area stacked with maintenance equipment and cleaning supplies, and found the tunnel access behind a gray metal door secured with a standard commercial key lock. Adrian looked at the lock. Elena reached into the frame above the door and produced a key. He stared at it. I put it there when I was 12, she said. I wanted to make sure I could always get out. He had no words for that. He used the key and the door opened and they went through. The tunnel was low and lit by fluorescent strips mounted at wide intervals, the kind of space that was built for utility and maintained for necessity and was never intended to be seen by anyone who had other options. They moved through it at a jog, Elena slightly ahead, confident in the direction, Adrian watching behind. The tunnel curved once and then straightened and ended at another gray door that opened with the same key. They came out behind the dry cleaning place on Vantage Street into the cool morning air of a city going about its business around the edges of a crisis it was entirely unaware of. Sasha had a car 2 blocks east. Adrian texted the location. 3 minutes, she replied. They stood in the narrow service alley behind Vantage Street and waited. Elena had her hands on her knees, head down, catching her breath. When she straightened, she pushed her hair back from her face with both hands, the right side and then the left, the scarred side, without the slight hesitation he had sometimes noticed in the first days when she touched that side of her face, as if some old reflex of concealment was still firing and being overridden. He watched her do it. Decker, he said. I know, she said. His phone buzzed. A message from a number he recognized as one of Carr's contact phones. A number Carr used only for confirmation signals, never for conversation. The message was a single character, a period, which meant Carr was alive and uncompromised and moving. A second later, the same character from a different number. Decker. Adrian exhaled. Elena looked at his face. They're out. Yes. She nodded. The nod of someone absorbing good news into a situation that was not yet resolved. Victor is going to call in every resource he has, she said. Yes. The political contacts, the perimeter they set on the lobby, he had that prepared before the meeting. He didn't expect the meeting to go wrong. He expected to manage it the way he manages everything. She paused. But he admitted it. In that room. He said he didn't make that decision lightly. He did. That's not enough. That's 2 witnesses in a private room, and his lawyers will dismantle it in 48 hours. She looked at him steadily. We need more. We have the documentation. The documentation proves the financial structure. It proves Portis. It creates a path to Victor, but it doesn't close it without a source. Her jaw was set. I told him on the phone that the journalists would have the material by 9. It's 9:43. Sasha hasn't sent it yet. No, I told her to hold until we were clear. Don't hold anymore, Elena said. Send it. He looked at her. Send it now, she said. All of it. And then we go public, not through a journalist as an intermediary directly. We find a camera and I stand in front of it today and I say everything. She held his gaze. The financial documentation makes it credible. My testimony makes it undeniable. And Victor knows that, which is why the lobby of that building is surrounded by people he controls and why we are standing in an alley behind a dry cleaning place at 9:45 in the morning. If you go on camera, see, I know. He will come after you directly, not through proxies, not through managed situations, directly. I know, she said again, and her voice did not change. But I have been managed by proxies my entire life, and I am finished with it. She breathed. He killed my mother. He tried to kill me twice. He kept me contained for 19 years because he was afraid of what I knew and what I was and who I would become if anyone ever gave me room to become it. Her eyes were very direct, very clear. I'm done giving him room to be afraid of me quietly. Sasha's car turned onto Vantage Street. Adrian looked at Elena for one more second, then he called Sasha. Send everything, he said. He heard keys moving on the other end of the line. Sent, Sasha said. The car pulled up. They got in. Sasha pulled back into traffic and the city moved around them, and somewhere across town, in a glass-walled meeting room on the 38th floor of a building with his name on it, Victor Hale was learning that the documentation he had spent 19 years believing he had buried was now traveling at the speed of an internet connection toward the inboxes of people whose entire professional purpose was to make buried things visible. And Elena Hale was sitting in the back seat of a moving vehicle with her hands flat on her thighs and her chin level. And Adrian Voss was looking at his phone at a message that had just arrived from a contact he had not heard from in 2 years. A federal investigator he had done a quiet service for a long time ago. A man who owed him a careful debt and had just received the same documentation package Sasha had sent, and whose message said only, I'm listening. There's a news station 3 blocks from here, Sasha said. Independent, not connected to any of Hale's media holdings. Adrian looked at Elena. Elena said, Drive. The news station was a 3-story building on Callaway that did not look like much from the outside. A narrow facade between a parking structure and a sandwich place, the kind of building that existed in cities without calling attention to itself, doing its work without architectural ambition. The sign above the entrance read, Meridian Independent Media in letters that had faded unevenly from the left, as if the sun hit that corner harder than the rest. Sasha pulled to the curb and kept the engine running. Adrian looked at the building. Then he looked at Elena. She was already looking at it. Her hands were in her lap. Her breathing was steady. Not the controlled steadiness of someone managing panic, but the real steadiness of someone who has passed through the part where panic was an option and come out the other side into something quieter and more durable. Once you go in there, he said, it doesn't stop. I know. Victor will have lawyers in front of a judge within the hour, injunctions, suppression orders, defamation claims. He has judges he owns. You said that like it's a reason not to go in. It's not, he said. I'm telling you what the next 72 hours look like. She turned and looked at him. What do they look like after that? He held her gaze. Different, he said. She opened the car door and got out. The station's front desk was staffed by a young woman who looked up from her monitor with the expression of someone accustomed to the public walking in with things they believed were urgent and rarely were. Elena said she needed to speak to whoever was responsible for investigative content, that she was Elena Hale, and that she had documentation relating to Victor Hale's financial operations that had been transmitted to the station's editorial address 40 minutes ago. The young woman's expression changed. They were shown to a back office within 4 minutes. The journalist was a woman in her 50s named Carver. No first name offered, just Carver, delivered with the flat economy of someone who had learned that first names invited a familiarity that complicated professional transactions. She was short, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and a desk that looked like a physical representation of organized chaos. She had printed the documentation package. It was on the desk in front of her, already annotated in red pen in the margins, the kind of annotation that happened fast and with purpose. She looked at Elena when they came in, and then at Adrian, and then back at Elena. Sit down, she said. They sat. I've been looking at this for 35 minutes, Carver said. She put her hand flat on the printed stack. Where did it come from? My mother, Elena said. She assembled it over 3 years before she died. She passed copies to her sister. Her sister kept them for 19 years. Your mother was Margot Hale. Yes. The fire. Yes. Carver looked at her for a long moment over the top of her glasses, not with sympathy, with the specific assessing attention of someone who has spent a career determining whether what they are hearing is true. You're prepared to go on record. That's why I'm here. On camera. On camera. Carver picked up her pen and made a note on the margin of the top page. Then she looked at Adrian. And you. I'm here as a witness to the events of the last 18 hours, Adrian said, including a verbal admission made by Victor Hale at 9:32 this morning in the presence of myself and 3 other individuals. Carver wrote something. What did he admit to? That a decision was made, Adrian said, regarding his wife. That it was not made lightly. Carver's pen stopped moving. She looked up. In those words, she said. In those words. She looked at them both for another moment. Then she pushed back from her desk and stood. I need my editor and our legal counsel in this room. That takes 15 minutes. I need you both to stay in this building until they get here. She paused at the door. Are you in immediate physical danger? Possibly, Adrian said. Then I'm also calling building security. She left. The office was quiet. The sounds of the station filtered through the walls. Phones, movement, the low ambient frequency of a place doing its work. Elena sat in her chair and looked at the annotated pages on Carver's desk and said nothing. Adrian sat beside her and looked at the door. After a moment, Elena said, My mother would have come to a place like this? Yes. She would have come here and sat in a chair like this and said it all. She paused. She just didn't get the chance. Adrian said nothing. There was nothing to say that would be adequate to that specific fact, and he knew when adequacy was not available, and he had learned, slowly, over a long time, that the most honest response to that kind of knowledge was silence, rather than the hollow language that attempted to fill it. Elena seemed to understand that. She did not look at him for a response. She looked at the pages. The editor and legal counsel arrived in 12 minutes. The interview setup took another 20. By the time Elena sat in front of a camera in a small studio on the station's second floor, it was 11:15 in the morning. She sat with her hands in her lap, her back straight, her face turned directly at the camera lens. The left side of her face, the scarred side, was toward the primary light. She had not adjusted her position to minimize it. She had not asked for a specific camera angle. The makeup person who had approached her had been thanked and redirected. Carver sat off camera with her notes. The red light came on. Elena talked for 1 hour and 40 minutes. She talked about the fire and her mother and the cabinet and the study. She talked about 19 years of managed isolation, of being moved and contained and kept away from the world under the language of protection. She talked about the marriage contract and the attack outside the courthouse and the conversation in the storage room of her aunt's property in Eastham, where she had first understood that her mother had been careful enough to prepare for exactly this. She talked about the meeting in the 38th floor room and what her father had said in it. She was not theatrical. She did not perform grief or outrage. She spoke in the same flat, precise voice she had used in the storage room, the voice trained by 19 years of needing to be accurate because accuracy was the only protection available to her. She spoke in that voice for 1 hour and 40 minutes, and when the red light went off, she sat in the chair for a moment without moving, and then she exhaled once, completely, the exhale of a person setting down something that has been in their arms for a very long time. Carver looked at her from across the studio. We'll run it tonight, she said. It was not a question and not a comfort. It was a professional statement delivered professionally, and Elena received it the same way. Run all of it, Elena said. All of it runs. They left the station at 1 in the afternoon. The next 48 hours were not clean. Victor Hale's lawyers filed injunctions in 2 courts within 90 minutes of the documentation package going public. Both injunctions were denied, one immediately, one after a 4-hour hearing in which the presiding judge reviewed the financial documentation and the federal investigator's preliminary assessment submitted as a supporting brief and found insufficient grounds for suppression. By 6 in the evening, every major wire service had the story. By 8, the station's broadcast of Elena's interview had been viewed 2.5 million times across their digital platforms. At 10:17 that night, federal agents arrived at Victor Hale's estate in Westbrook. Victor was not there. He had left through a private exit at approximately the same time Elena had been sitting down in Carver's studio. A car to a private airfield north of the city, a filed flight plan to an international destination that his lawyers would later claim was a pre-scheduled business trip. The flight plan was not completed. 40 miles outside the city, the aircraft turned back. The reason was not immediately public, but emerged over the following days through the simultaneous and largely redundant investigations of 3 separate federal agencies. Victor Hale's primary overseas account, the first shell company, the foundational structure, the one established by the signed authorization that Margot Hale had photographed 19 years ago, had been frozen within hours of the documentation package reaching regulatory inboxes. The accounts that fed it and flowed from it followed in sequence over the next 6 hours, each freeze triggering the next, the whole secondary architecture collapsing inward from its foundation the way a building collapses when the structure beneath the ground fails. Victor had been flying toward money that no longer existed in the form he needed it. He turned back. He was detained at the airfield by federal agents at 11:49 that night. Portis was arrested at his office the following morning. He did not resist and did not speak to the arresting agents without counsel, and was through processing and into a holding facility before noon. He requested a cooperation agreement from federal prosecutors within 4 hours of his arrest. He was offered terms. He accepted them. The terms required full disclosure of his role in the secondary financial structure and his knowledge of related activities going back 23 years. He disclosed everything. Everything included the fire. It included a phone call made from Portis's private line to a number that belonged to a man who had since died, but whose estate still contained phone records showing the incoming call. It included a payment made through one of the early shell company structures. Not to a contractor directly, the insulation was better than that, but to an intermediary whose records, now that the structure was open, showed the chain clearly enough. It included a subsequent payment, smaller, described in the records as a consulting fee, made to a firm that had provided the official fire investigation report classifying the cause as undetermined. The official record was revised. Cause of the fire at the Hale residence in Westbrook, Elena's age at the time, 9 years, was reclassified from undetermined to incendiary, origin point consistent with accelerant application, and the classification of Margot Hale's death was revised accordingly. Elena learned this from a federal agent who came to the apartment on the north side of the city where she had been staying. Not Adrian's safe house, not anything connected to his organization, but a furnished apartment Sasha had arranged through a clean channel, anonymous and functional, with 2 locks on the door and a window that faced a courtyard rather than a street. The agent was professional and careful with the language. He delivered the information in the tone of someone who had delivered similar information before and understood that there was no correct way to do it, and had stopped trying to find one. Elena listened. She thanked him. She showed him out. She stood in the middle of the apartment for a long time after the door closed. The apartment was very quiet. The courtyard outside the window held a single tree that was past its leaves for the season, bare branches against a gray November sky. She did not cry immediately. She stood, and she breathed, and she looked at the tree, and she let the information settle through her the way water settles through soil. Not fast, not clean, finding the levels and the spaces and the places it had always been going. Then she sat down on the floor, her back against the couch, her knees up, and she pressed her face into her hands and she cried for a long time. Not the careful, controlled version, the real version, the one that had been waiting since she was 9 years old and had never had a space large enough and safe enough and private enough to happen in until now. She cried until she was empty, and then she sat in the quiet of the empty and breathed. Adrian came that evening. He knocked. She opened the door. He looked at her face, at the redness around her eyes, the specific exhaustion of someone who has wept properly and thoroughly. And he said nothing about it and came in and sat in the chair near the window. She made coffee. She brought 2 cups and sat on the couch across from him, and they sat in the quiet of the apartment with the coffee and the bare tree outside and the gray of a November evening coming down. Portis cooperated, he said. I know. The agent told me. The reclassification, I know. He held his cup and looked at her. She looked at the window. After a moment, she said, "It doesn't change what happened. Knowing the official record says what it should say doesn't change what happened." "No. But it matters," she said. "It matters that it's in a record somewhere, that it's true somewhere officially." She paused. She deserved that. "Yes," he said. "She did." They were quiet again. The city outside made its sounds. Somewhere below, a door opened and closed. "Victor," she said, "remanded without bail. The flight attempt counted against him. The financial charges alone are enough, but the reclassification adds a dimension that makes the prosecutorial position very strong." He paused. "He'll have lawyers who will fight for years. It won't go quickly." "But it goes." "It goes," he said. "It's in motion. It doesn't stop." She nodded. She looked at her coffee cup. "He called me from the estate 2 days ago, before the federal agents arrived." She looked up. "His lawyer called me on his behalf. He wanted to talk." Adrian said nothing. "I didn't take the call," she said. "I thought about it. I thought about what I would say and what he would say, and whether there was anything either of us could say that would mean anything." She set the cup down. "There wasn't. There won't be. Some things don't resolve that way." "No." "He's still my father." "Yes." "That doesn't make what he did smaller." "No," Adrian said. "It makes it larger." She looked at him. Something moved in her expression. Not quite gratitude, something more complicated than gratitude. The expression of someone who has been heard in the specific way they needed to be heard, rather than the way other people needed to hear themselves respond. "What happens to your organization?" she said. He leaned back in the chair. Outside, the light was almost gone, the tree now a dark shape against a darker sky. "It depends on what I want it to be," he said. "What do you want it to be?" He thought about that for a real moment, not a performed moment, an actual one, the kind where the answer was not preformed and had to be found in the process of looking for it. He thought about 15 years of building a structure on the foundation of fear, of loyalty purchased through the understanding that the alternative to loyalty was worse. He thought about the specific quality of the last 4 days, the running, the burning locations, the breach in his organization's foundation that had come not from an external enemy, but from within, from a place that his own methods had made possible, because the methods that produced fear also produced men who could be purchased by a larger fear. He thought about the storage room in Eastham and the boxes stacked in the dark, and a 9-year-old girl who had survived a fire and spent 19 years paying attention when nobody thought she was. "Something different," he said. "That's not an answer." "No." He looked at her. "The security infrastructure, some of it converts. There are legitimate security operations that use the same skill sets, the same networks, the same operational capacity. Protection, risk management, asset security for people who need real protection rather than the performed kind." He paused. "Decker can run that. He's been running it effectively for years. He just hasn't had the paperwork." "And the rest?" "The rest gets wound down, carefully, with people taken care of where possible." He met her eyes. "It's not fast, it's not clean. There are obligations that don't resolve overnight, but it's directional. It has a direction." She studied him. "Is that what you want, or what you think you should want?" The question was direct and without apology, the way all her questions were. He had stopped being surprised by them and had started, somewhere in the last 4 days, to find them necessary. The way certain tools become necessary, not because they are comfortable, but because nothing else does the job with the same precision. "Both," he said. "At this point, I think they're the same thing." She picked up her coffee cup again. She looked at the dark window. "My Aunt Lena," she said. "I called her this morning." He looked at her. "She's been in Portugal for 11 years. She knew the boxes were there. She knew I would eventually find them, or someone would." Elena looked at the cup. "She's been waiting. She's been living her life and waiting, and she said when I called, she didn't say anything for a while. She just breathed." "What did you tell her?" "I told her it was done, that the boxes had done what my mother meant for them to do." A pause. She said my mother used to say that the truth doesn't expire. She said she had been living on that for 11 years. The apartment was very quiet. She's coming back, Elena said. She's flying back next week. She has things she wants to give me. Things that were my mother's that she kept. Elena set the cup down. I haven't had family. I've had a father who managed me. I haven't had family. I know, Adrian said. I want to, she said. It was a simple sentence and it cost her something to say it. Not because she was ashamed of it, but because it was so simple and so long delayed that saying it aloud gave it a weight that almost didn't fit through an ordinary sentence. I want to have something that I built and that belongs to me and that exists because I chose it. He looked at her across the small apartment and the bare tree and the November dark. The marriage contract, he said. She looked at him. Portis has been arrested. Victor has been remanded. The contractual terms were contingent on Victor's network of business connections, none of which exist in their previous form. He held her gaze. Legally, the contract is void. Yes, she said. I know. I'm not raising it as a conclusion, he said. I'm raising it as a fact, because I think you've had enough situations where other people treated facts as conclusions on your behalf. She was very still. What I'm asking, he said, which is different from the contract, is whether you want to continue. This. Whatever this is. What the last 4 days have been. He paused. Not because of what was signed, because of what happened after it was signed. The question sat in the room between them. Outside, the wind moved through the bare branches of the tree, and the branches moved against the dark sky without resistance, without trying to be other than what they were. Elena looked at him for a long time. She looked at him the way she had looked at him outside the courthouse on the morning that had started all of this, with those direct dark eyes, cataloging, assessing, finding where he belonged in the taxonomy of things she had encountered and deciding which category was accurate. You built a contingency for me, she said, before you knew anything about me, before you had a reason to. Yes. Why? He thought about this. Because something about the arrangement was wrong, he said, and when something is wrong, I prepare for it being wrong rather than hoping I've misread it. He paused. But the honest answer is I don't know entirely. I read the medical records and something in them, the age at the time of the fire, the classification as undetermined, the way the documentation around you read like the documentation around a problem rather than a person. Something made me want to build a door. For me, yes. She breathed in slowly. Outside, the sound of the city continued its indifferent, steady work. She looked at her hands in her lap, and then at the window, and then at him. The foundation that my father built, she said. The charitable structure, the one attached to his legitimate business holdings. He waited. When it's seized and reorganized as part of the asset recovery, and it will be, the lawyer said the charitable structure is part of the civil proceedings. I want to propose to the court that it be reconstituted rather than dissolved, under different management, for a different purpose. She looked at him. There are families, children from situations like mine, not identical, but similar. Parents who were supposed to protect them and didn't. Systems that were supposed to help them and instead managed them. She paused. The foundation had an infrastructure, staff, legal standing, operating accounts. I want to rebuild it into something that does what it was supposed to do. That takes money, he said. I know. And legal standing of your own. I'm working on that. He looked at her. You've been working on that since before you made the call to Portis last night. I've been thinking about it since the storage room in Eastham, she said. Since I opened those boxes and understood that my mother spent 3 years building something careful and true, and then it burned. I didn't want to do this and then have nothing to show for it, except that a bad man went to prison. She paused. Prisons are full of bad men. That's not enough. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, I know people who know how to structure the legal standing. Clean people, not the organizational kind. Lawyers who do this specifically. Asset recovery petitions, nonprofit reconstitution, the whole architecture. I know you do, she said. Is that a yes to the question I asked? She looked at him, and for the first time since the courthouse, Since the very first moment he had seen her walk through the double doors in a dark dress with her face unguarded and her posture carrying the weight of a decision she had already made, the careful management of her expression released in a way that was not grief and not exhaustion and not the determination he had watched carry her through 4 days of the worst kind of pressure. It was something simpler than all of those things. "It's a yes," she said. 3 months later, Elena Hale stood in a room that had once been the conference space of her father's charitable foundation and was now in the process of becoming something else. The walls had been repainted. The furniture had been changed. The name on the door had been covered with paper while the new one was decided on. Elena stood in the middle of the empty room with a coffee cup in her hand and looked at the covered nameplate and thought about what to put there. The federal trial was ongoing. It would be ongoing for a long time. Victor's lawyers were formidable, and the case was complex, and the legal process moved at the speed of legal processes, which was not fast. Elena had testified at the preliminary hearing. She had sat in a chair in a federal courtroom and answered questions for 4 hours. And she had done it in the same flat, precise voice she had used in Carver's studio, looking at the ceiling when she needed to and at the questioner when she didn't. And when it was done, she had walked out of the building into the cold of a February afternoon and stood on the courthouse steps and breathed the outside air. Portis's cooperation agreement had produced what the prosecutors needed at the foundational level. The chain of evidence connecting the fire to Victor's instruction was not ironclad. It was the nature of 23-year-old evidence managed by careful people. But it was sufficient for the civil reclassification that had already occurred and was building toward the criminal charge that the federal prosecutor's office was preparing with the particular patience of people who intended to get it right rather than get it quickly. Decker ran the security operation out of an office on the south side of the city. It had taken him 2 months to get the licenses in order, and 3 weeks after that to land the first legitimate contract, a risk assessment and protection detail for a pharmaceutical executive who had received credible threats from a former business partner. He had called Adrian to tell him about it, and Adrian had said, "Good," and Decker had said, "Yeah." And they had sat on the phone for a moment in the specific companionable silence of two people who understood each other, without requiring more words than the situation demanded. Carr had gone to his sister's property in the south of the state. He called once a month. He did not miss the work the way he thought he would, which surprised him, and he had told Adrian this with a note of genuine puzzlement in his voice, as if the absence of something he had expected to miss was its own category of strange. Sasha was in graduate school, communications program. She had enrolled 2 weeks after the Hale story broke, having been offered, on the basis of her handling of the documentation distribution and the speed of her technical work over those 48 hours, a position at Carver's station that she had considered for approximately one afternoon before deciding she would rather understand the theory than practice the application for the time being. She sent Adrian occasional messages that contained more information than they seemed to on first read, a habit she had apparently been unable to entirely abandon. Adrian stood in the doorway of the empty room and watched Elena look at the covered nameplate. "What does it become?" he said. She turned. She had a folder under her arm. The reconstitution proposal, the legal framework, the program outline she had been working on for 3 months with the clean lawyers he had connected her to, and 2 consultants she had found on her own, a child welfare specialist and a forensic social worker who had both looked at her proposal and then at her and said yes before she had finished explaining it. "Something with her name," Elena said. "My mother's name. Not as a memorial, as a direction." She looked at the covered plate. She was trying to do something true. It got her killed. That's not the end of the thing she was trying to do. She looked at Adrian. It's just where someone interrupted it. He crossed the room and stood beside her. They looked at the covered nameplate together. The room smelled of fresh paint and the specific clean smell of a space that has been emptied of its previous purpose and is waiting for a new one. "Margot," she said. "The name of the program. Simple, not adorned. The Margot Foundation." He said nothing. He stood beside her in the empty room, and the name settled into the space the way names settle when they are right, without fanfare, without announcement, just becoming the thing it was always going to be. She reached out and pulled the paper off the nameplate. Beneath it, The plate was blank. Ready. Elena looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Adrian. The scar on the left side of her face caught the room's light the way it always did. Not softened, not minimized, simply present, part of the face she had, the face that had carried her through a fire, and 19 years and 4 days that had broken open the long silence and let the true thing finally out into the air. She had stopped moving differently in rooms. He had noticed this without mentioning it, and she had not mentioned it either, and neither of them had needed to. It was simply a thing that had changed, the way some things change without ceremony, without the moment being named, just quietly becoming true in the ordinary course of days. "Ready," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," he said. They walked out of the empty room into the corridor, into the work that was waiting, into the specific ordinary difficulty of building something true from the materials of something that had been a lie for 23 years. And the door closed behind them with a sound that was entirely unremarkable, which was exactly right. Outside, the city did what cities do. It moved. It carried on its business. It held in its streets and its buildings, and its particular winter light all the stories that were always happening simultaneously, the ones that ended and the ones that were beginning and the ones that were still in the middle of themselves, not yet resolved, still finding out what they were. The name on the door was blank. Tomorrow someone would come and letter it, but the room was ready, and that was enough to start.